Sorry, if you don't mind, I'm going to do a bit of a segue, a bit of a detour here.
Hmm.
So both my children are by IVF, and my husband and I have no idea why we were infertile at all, but we did our fertility treatment in the UK.
Hmm.
So my children were born in 2001 and 2006, after several years of fertility treatment. Every IVF cycle in the UK, by law, must be registered, and the outcome must be reported as well. And that has been the case since the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority was set up by the Human Fertilization and Embryology Act, well before I started my baby making history.
Hmm.
And the reason was they were worried that the kids who would be born of IVF might have a higher rate of disabilities or problems, you know.
Hmm.
But the result is that, like, what we know about IVF almost really fundamentally came from the UK because every IVF cycle was logged.
Wow.
And it was almost, and that was for private as well. I had to pay privately. The NHS didn't cover me. And every IVF cycle is logged. And that is how we have the best figures as well on success rates, the most accurate ones, because the private clinics elsewhere play, silly buggers with their figures.
Right.
Like they don't count cycles that stop before the transfer of an embryo or that sort of thing.
Right.
And we could have done that here. We could have done that with child gender medicine. We could
Yes.
have said, by law, every child who's registered, who goes to a gender medicine, gets a unique number and is tracked anonymously. No intrusion on their privacy. There's no intrusion on mine. Nobody's come back to me
Yes.
ever with that data. You know, we could have done that and we didn't. So Hilary Cass, she did her best with the data that's available. She hired a very specialist team of researchers at the University of York who do what are called systematic reviews. So in medicine, there's this process which is well worked out of ranking papers on a topic, and you set out what your search terms are, you search all the relevant literature, you identify the papers, you then rank those papers according to, at the very lowest, it's a single report of one person just as an observational study, and at the top is a gold star randomized control trial with a long follow-up,
Hmm.
and in between, there's other things. And she said that there were 102 papers, I think it was, that were relevant. I think it was about 50 of them were so bad that they had to be excluded entirely. Because when you do a meta study like that, you exclude the really poor studies because they're more likely than not to lead you astray.
Right.
And there were two that were top quality, and the rest were sort of middling quality.
Right.
And then you do a process whereby you synthesize all the results. And what she got to, so puberty blockers definitely do not stop suicide.
Hmm.
They don't make a difference to it as far as we can tell. Uh, Kids with gender dysphoria are somewhat more do suffer more from suicidality and completed suicide, but not when you take into account their other mental health conditions.
Right.
Very standard for kids who have, all the other conditions that these kids who are seen at gender clinics have.
Right.
Um, no long-term follow-ups, incredibly poor evidence base overall. She just said basically she wasn't able to answer any of the questions she wanted, and then she dropped this bombshell, and she said in the clinics, none of the clinics will give me any of their data.
Right.
They still haven't, by the way. The time has run out on that statutory instrument, and they'd have to pass another one to get them to do it.
Right.
And where they're now thinking of doing a proper study, a proper trial of puberty blockers, which I don't think they should. I don't think they should
Hmm.
do that until they get the long-term follow-up data on
No.
the kids who've already taken them.
Yes. So she used the two quality studies and the 30 something medium
Yeah, I
ones.
think
She
it was
included
nearly
those.
50 medium ones. Yeah, and
Yeah.
you weight them. You weight the
Yes.
top quality ones stronger
Right.
and so on. And I mean,
Right.
I should say that there's a whole load of disinformation out there on the Cass review. So people say she threw away all but two of the papers. She didn't.
Right.
It's a completely standard methodology, this. And then people say she kept only the randomized control trials. She didn't. There weren't any. So there have been no randomized control trials on puberty blockers. So are you interested in the methodology of these things? Or is this too specialist? I can tell you why there isn't.
Sure. Let's hear it
Yeah, I'll do
short
it.
for
I'll
a
try and
bit.
make it
Yeah.
short.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically, what you want in a medical trial is ideally, you'd have the same person take something, then you'd rewind the clock and you'd have the same person not take it. But we
Yes.
can't do that. So
Right.
what you try to get is groups of people who are the same in every respect.
Uh-huh.
And so what you do there is you randomize them. You have a group of people who are all suitable for whatever it is,
Right.
and then nobody looks ideally. The researcher doesn't know, the individual doesn't know, nobody knows. It's done with like basically sort of closed envelopes conceptually.
Uh-huh.
and you give one group one thing and the other group the other thing. But
Right.
you can't always do that. You can't
Mhm.
always do the blinding
Mhm.
because sometimes it's obvious who's got what.
Yes.
So one of my brothers did was on a trial for an MS drug, and it gives you a rash at the site of an injection. So they weren't able to blind that
Uh-huh.
because the people who had it knew.
Right.
Um, they uh, they can't blind puberty blockers because it's very obvious who's taken them very quickly.
Yes.
And that means that you can only do a randomized trial if people genuinely don't mind which arm of it they're on,
Hmm.
because they'll know and they'll stop, they'll drop out if
Hmm.
they're on the one that they don't want to be on.
Sure.
And so we've just seen 20 solid years of propaganda that puberty blockers are life-saving. They're not
Right.
going to be able to run a randomized trial.
Right.
So what they're going to have to do, they haven't published the exact protocol. What I think they'll be doing is they'll be using a sort of synthetic control group, which is that they will identify a group of kids who are the same in every respect: socioeconomic status, health, sex, age, whatever, as the kids they're giving the puberty blockers to.
Hmm.
But of course, those kids won't have gender dysphoria.
Ah,
So, so
right.
it just can't be a very good study. Like it
Right.
just can't. It's not their
Right.
fault. It
Right.
can't.
Right. And just can you just expand on that to describe a little bit, first of all, who are these kids that want to transition? Because I know there's specific types of children, and starting with the sex of them, a large group of girls, etc., but other things. And then what is the detriment, the actual detriment to these drugs?
So the kids who are seen at gender clinics, especially in a country like the UK, where we're very stingy with specialist referrals and you can't
Hmm.
get to see a specialist unless you're referred by your family doctor,
Hmm.
they're the tip of the iceberg.
Hmm.
So only a few thousand kids have been seen at
Hmm.
gender clinics. I can't
Hmm.
remember the exact number, but it's in the thousands.
Hmm.
Um, they are, they used to be almost entirely boys when the numbers were just 40, 50. They were really almost all boys. Now they're overwhelmingly girls.
Hmm.
They used to be young boys, and now it's teenage girls by and large.
Hmm.
They used to be relatively well functioning, except for the fact that they were really very highly gender non-conforming, which, by the way, means they were going to grow up gay if people had just bloody well left them alone.
Hmm.
Now they're very distressed teenage girls, really high incidences of childhood adverse events like sexual abuse, very nasty marital breakups, and so on. Lots of self-harm, very high level of autism or autistic spectrum disorder, I should say.
Hmm.
Many of them have like five diagnoses, ADHD, OCD, etc., etc. Um, they are much more likely to be same-sex attracted, which is obviously a question you only ask of teenagers, you don't ask it of little kids.
Hmm.
But these teenage girls will describe themselves as attracted towards girls.
Hmm.
I mean, you have to ask these questions carefully because they think they're boys.
Right.
Um, that is less so now. That was overwhelmingly a few years ago. Overwhelmingly, it was same-sex attracted teenagers.
Hmm.
Now it's less so because it's gone out into the general population.
Yes.
And it used to be very much gender non-conforming kids, and that is, a group that was very highly overrepresented with
Right.
same-sex attracted people. Now it's the go-to answer for why do I feel so shit?
Yeah.
But that's the tip of the iceberg thing.
Yeah.
And those kids, in this country, they've never given them cross-sex hormones on the NHS under 16. Some
Uh-huh.
private doctors have, but you've never had that on the NHS. So they've been given puberty blockers instead, some of them, and then put on cross-sex hormones at 16, and then mastectomy at 18, and possibly soon afterwards genital surgery. Um, the puberty blockers, the emerging evidence is that they do cause you possibly quite significant physical
Hmm.
harms. Puberty is when you lay down most of the calcium in your bones, so you would expect that people would have fragile bones as they grow older.
Hmm.
Sometimes not very much older. There have been case reports of kids in their 20s with the sort of injuries you see in people in their 80s.
Hmm.
Um, Puberty is also a time that your brain reorganizes very considerably, where you learn executive function, to assess risks better, to plan and strategize, to be more grown up, in other words. So interrupting that is unlikely to be a great idea.
Hmm.
Puberty is also when your physical reactions as you grow teach you your sexuality. So it
Hmm.
interrupts the process of coming to understand your own sexuality.
Hmm.
Um, those are the things that we can be pretty sure happen at the
Right.
sort of the non-sexual level. But then at the sexual level, puberty is also when you become fully orgasmic and when your genitals and your internal sex organs mature.
Yes.
So if you interrupt puberty early enough, you will be somebody who's not just infertile, you're sterile. You're somebody who can't become fertile.
Right.
So the boys who have early puberty blockade still retain little boy penises
Right.
and don't ejaculate with sperm in their ejaculate. I wish I didn't have to talk about this, but there we go.
No.
Like, that you're damned either way. They say that I'm obsessed with kids' genitals, but I'm not the one who's making eunuchs.
No.
If they're going to make eunuchs, I have to talk about kids' genitals.
People need to
The
know
girls,
the realities of it. Yeah.
yeah, and then they tell fairy tales about it.
Yes.
In the Keira Bell hearing, which was in the High Court, was judicial review of the treatment she had been received. So she's an adult detransitioner who went
Hmm.
to court to get a ruling that the treatment that she had been given was not suitable. The clinic in London, the Tavistock, put up a specialist to say that they had given puberty blockers to kids as young as 10. Now, the 10-year-olds were all girls, and a 10-year-old girl, you have all the eggs that you're ever going to have when you're born.
Yeah.
Um, but the ovaries won't mature, and she hadn't. These girls will not have started the process of menstruation, which is when you produce mature eggs.
Right.
So they said, "Well, did you talk to those girls about the fact that they would not become mothers?" And they said, "No, we didn't, because at 14 they could come off the puberty blockers for 6 months, go through enough maturity that we would then extract some eggs and freeze them." You're like, they're not going to do that. These are kids who are obsessed with the idea that puberty will kill them.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I mean, egg freezing is very experimental. And anyway, the pathway that they're on is
Mm-hmm.
likely to end with a hysterectomy. So who's going to carry the bloody baby? Like, this is all insane. This is just a fairy tale. It's a way of avoiding ever talking to 10-year-olds
Yes.
about the fact that you're going to
Yes.
turn them into people who can't have kids.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so that's the medical pathway.
Yes.
But then there are tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of kids who have some special identity who never go near a gender clinic.
Right.
And, if that's just like, oh, I have special pronouns and I dye my hair blue. I mean, everyone does that level of messing around as a teenager and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of them are getting very confused and difficult ideas about their bodies. They're very sexist ideas, but I mean, that's very irritating, but I can cope. But when they get bad ideas about their bodies that make them hate themselves and feel dis-ease in their bodies and that encourage other mental illnesses and also encourage risky behavior. So
Mm-hmm.
increasingly, I'm hearing from parents that their teenage daughters do insanely stupid things like use the men's loos in nightclubs and pubs
Sure.
because they're men. And these are girls who, they may not have had a mastectomy, they've not taken tea, they just look like girls.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm starting to hear about men grooming women like this
Mm-hmm.
specifically
Mm-hmm.
because they're vulnerable and
Sure.
have not got smarts because they're
Yeah.
thinking something stupid.
Yes.
So yeah, I've heard some quite distressing stories about how dangerous this is.
Yes. Yeah, I believe it. You talked when you were first sort of learning more about these topics. You talked about attending a detransition panel of 6 young women who I think you said they all were ended up being lesbians, and
Yeah,
the how powerful that was, how that affected you and had an impact on you. Can you briefly say
that's
anything
right.
about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was if I remember correctly, that was in 2019. And it was the day I decided I definitely had to write the book. I've been thinking very hard about it and even doing some planning about it. But,
Hmm.
I was finance editor of The Economist at the time, so it didn't exactly fit with the
Right.
day job.
Right.
And I just knew that this was going to be a level of grief that, you either go all in on this or you don't.
Hmm.
You're not allowed to just do it like you might do anything else. Just do it and
No.
then move on. So I went to this panel, and as I say, there were six of them. And one of them was Keira Bell, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I met her. One of them was a young woman who I profiled in my book, and she was really the reason that I decided to write it because, I mean, what had happened to her was horrific. So she had had a very serious eating disorder as a teenager. She knew she was lesbian, but she said that she never called herself lesbian because a lot of teenage girls don't and women don't because it's a porn category. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmingly what young people think of it as being. Lesbian
Yes.
means the porn with more than one woman aimed at men,
Yes.
which is one of the reasons they say queer. They she had been bullied. She had fallen in love with another girl. This is a very standard story for young lesbians. You know, they fall in love, they have a sort of passion for another girl, and that other girl does not reciprocate it and finds it deeply embarrassing, maybe bitches a bit about them. They get ostracized because girls ostracize this poor
Mhm.
girl, you know. And then she'd been hospitalized several times for like basically to save her life for the eating disorder. And then one day, now she was 18 already when this happened, she Googled to see if it was possible to get your breasts removed for anything other than breast cancer.
Mhm.
And this was driven by her eating disorder. Now she's incredibly skinny. She hadn't got breasts, but she wanted to cut off anything she could.
Mhm.
And that was how she discovered trans.
Mhm.
She discovered that you could if you were a trans man. And she
Right.
became very seized with the idea almost immediately.
Right.
And then catastrophically, she went to see a counselor, and the counselor said that probably her eating disorder was because she was really a man, and that what she was doing was trying to starve away her curves. And if she transitioned, it would solve the eating disorder. And her parents were very supportive. Like they thought that they were losing their daughter. They had, you know, they had been ready for her to die. And they were willing to do anything to save her life. So they backed this idea up. She got her breasts cut off. She took testosterone. When she was 21, she had her uterus and ovaries removed.
Mhm.
She was planning to have a phalloplasty, which is an absolutely gruesome operation that should
Mhm.
land people in jail if they do it. She'd even gone to see a surgeon, but she was still feeling so very unwell from the hysterectomy, and it hadn't solved her eating disorder at all. And she also felt like a liar. Like she said, and I've heard this so many times, like the dysphoria moves. Like
Mhm.
now she's got facial hair, she's no breasts, but her hips are wrong, her hands are wrong, her wrists are wrong. Like, you know, it just, you can't fix everything. You can't remake the whole body, so it's the
No.
opposite sex. And so she was searching one night. I mean, these stories, so many of these kids' stories have these you know, these searches online. She was trying to find people who would help her to understand why she still felt so bad a year after a hysterectomy.
Right.
Hysterectomies are awful operations. You, of course, you feel bad after it. It's a huge operation, but it had
Yes.
been sold to her as, you know, bottom surgery,
Right.
life-saving. You know, just you're a man, so you don't need your uterus. And she found these lovely online groups of support groups for women who have had cancer or endometriosis, and they were so nice to her and so supportive.
Right.
And one night she suddenly thought to herself, how did an operation that was meant to turn me into a man, you know, how did an operation that can only be done to a woman turn me into a man?
Mhm.
And it was like she said, it was like she bounced on the wall and she went straight back to her starting place.
Wow.
So I think she was 22 or 23 at that time. So in 4 or 5 years, she went from somebody who had never thought,
Wow.
you know, that there was even such a thing as being
Right.
born in the wrong body,
Right.
had all her reproductive organs removed and bounced back to where she started, still with an eating disorder, still very distressed, you know, still socially anxious, etc., etc., except now with a whole bunch of medical conditions and sterile.
Shame on
So
those
yeah,
that
I
clinician
know,
that
I know.
suggested that to her right off the bat.
I stayed in touch with her for a while afterwards. I haven't heard from her for a while, although you know, I have her on my phone and I see when she
Mm-hmm.
does her status updates and things.
Mm-hmm.
She did find some peace, you know.
Mm-hmm.
She told me she had never wanted to have kids,
Mm-hmm.
and I really think she meant it. I mean, it's easy to say that in your
Mm-hmm.
mid-20s,
Right.
but she said like she's just so lesbian, she said. And she said it's such a heterosexual thing to do to have children.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I know so many lesbians with kids, but anyway,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like what's the point in me saying that to her? Like
Yes.
she can't have kids.
Right.
So she was a very impressive young woman, and I listened to her and I listened to those other kids, and you know, what had been done to them was awful. And they were there was something that I didn't put my finger on then either. Sorry, you're letting me ramble on, and I'm grateful. But do stop me. Something I've realized since is that this eats up people's teens if they go into it as teenagers. They
Yes.
think about nothing else. They get very absorbed with their special
Yes.
identity, and they miss out
They
on
lose
the
a lot.
normal things of growing up.
They do.
And they grow up then sometimes quite childish and with
Yes.
poorly formed selves. I mean, this was not true of this girl particularly at all, but it was very true of one of the others. She
Yes.
was sort of babyish. And I followed her for some years on social media afterwards, and she had not medicalized. She was the only one who hadn't medicalized.
Mm-hmm.
and she had called herself non-binary rather than a man, and now she thought of herself as a TERF. And then she went back to then she became a Christian. That was it. She became an evangelical
Uh-huh.
Christian, and then she became a born again trans person who said that TERFs had
Oh,
um, propagandized her. And the last I saw was that she was lined up for her mastectomy and tea.
oh dear.
So
Very
this is a
confused.
story of a person with a very fragile
Yes.
identity and sense of self
Yes.
because she wasted her teens, you
Yes.
know.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I've met some young people like that. They can't, they don't go and get a job because someone might misgender them, and that would be horrible. So they can't go and
And
work
so
in a
they
coffee
miss those
shop.
learning
They miss
experiences.
it. They do. Yeah. Well, in about 10 minutes we're going to open up for questions, but I have two or three other things I want to ask you, and so yeah, we will have to keep it a little shorter, although I could listen to you
Okay,
ramble. That's
sorry.
not a problem. No. Um, I've heard you speak about, there's so many things to be angry about or upset about, and you keep that anger at bay, so because you want to keep working on this work, and it's hard to do. And I watched an interview of you recently with, I think it was the second time I've watched it, but John Anderson in Australia, the former politician.
Oh yeah.
Um, and it felt quite emotional compared to most of the interviews I've seen of you. And so it led me to think about, the balancing out, how any of us that are spend so much time thinking about this, working on it, talking to people about it in whatever way we do, and you do it a lot more than I do. How, can we talk just for a few minutes about balance and balancing life? And there's people who should be doing this work, people who shouldn't, probably for their own sanity or health, and how to balance that, so that we
Mm.
don't lose ourselves in that kind of anger.
Yeah,
And
and don't burn out. People
yeah,
do burn out on
yeah,
this. I mean, there's only, I presume there's only some number of times that you can say there are only two sexes. I mean, I feel like I've said it a million times and I'm still saying it, but at some point, presumably, I will not be able physically to make myself say it again. Um, I mean, we need to have each other. We need to have people who support us and who keep us real because you see people spiral off into insanity in this.
yes,
I mean, there are people that I used to get on with and think were quite sensible people, and they've just become so vitriolic
yes,
online. And, sometimes I hear their backstory and it makes me so sorry for them, like they've
yes,
lost child or, they've lost work or whatever. I mean, I mute and block big time because I just can't take it. I cannot take the aggro. I can't take
mm-hmm,
it. And you say that I talk about it a lot, but I talk about it in quite controlled circumstances. I don't talk to friends and family about this
mm-hmm,
unless I know they're on side. And there are
mm-hmm,
friends and family who are not on side. So
mm-hmm.
I just don't talk to them about it. I can't do it. I
Right,
just can't. And for me, that would be low impact and very high stress.
right, okay,
So I only do things that I think will have systemic impact.
right,
I really, people are always saying to me, how can I persuade my best friend? How can I persuade my
yeah,
sister? Don't.
right,
Don't even try.
right,
What's the point? Unless your sister or your best friend is a head teacher or a doctor or
right,
something like that, don't try.
uh-huh,
Make your head teacher in your child's school's life a living nightmare rather than bother your sister.
right,
That would be my advice. And
yeah,
then the other thing is compartmentalize.
yes,
I mean, through all of this, I'm not the only person who would say this. I'm a woman in my mid 50s. Do the sums and work out what age my parents are.
mm-hmm,
And, many women listening to this, if you're the same age or, you're older, you'll know what the last 5 years, a significant part of them have been for me.
mm-hmm,
I've had to learn to compartmentalize that too.
mm-hmm,
There's no
mm-hmm.
point in me worrying about my parents when I'm not with them. When I am with them,
Right,
I give them all my time.
right, right,
And I feel like that about this.
right,
I do think about it for a good part of every working day because it's my job,
right.
but I don't stress about it. I don't fret about
Oh,
it.
good.
I've long ago decided that we're not going to do any of this the easy way.
No,
Like literally every single thing we do is going to have to be the hardest possible way there
yes,
is to get there
yes,
because nobody is doing their job and nobody is listening and
that's right.
everybody is weaponizing incompetence and deafness.
Yes,
And I've just completely internalized that and I'm all zen about it.
yes, good. That sounds good. I do talk to friends and family and get them on board. Um, but if there's a quick closed door. I don't try and bang on it too hard, but
Yes, I do talk if people want me to. I never try to persuade someone who doesn't want to listen,
yeah, yeah.
unless they're
For
a
a couple of people,
politician.
there's been a few that I have banged on the door, even though, and it's worked and it made headway. Or also, I'm also okay to have friends that we can disagree on different things too, of course. Well, maybe I can wrap the last question into one because you're so good at tying all these things together. But you talk about how interconnected all these things are, how this ideology has attacked all the different structures in our society as well as individuals, but through institutions it's so hard to um, it's so hard to break through to that, and for us who want to make the changes, working our way backwards, work our way back through to make the same connections in some ways, but to bring back women's rights and spaces, to bring back sanity, biological sanity, safety, fairness, you know, um, whatever we achieve, whatever we're able to regain and repair. You've talked about how we can work together to bind that. And maybe I'll combine that with Sex Matters, because that's what you're doing. That's part of your job, is you're the, um, what's your title again?
Director of advocacy. It doesn't
Director
mean
of
anything.
advocacy. Yeah.
It's just a job
So,
title.
so in our struggle to try and work our way backwards to where it was a saner time and gain the rights that we had and bring sanity back to these institutions, what is Sex Matters, and what do you do there? And tell us a little bit about
Sure.
that.
And they are very connected
Yeah.
questions, really, because I mean, the connection thing means that, on the downside, it's like that thing where you're snookered, like everything. Is it? Yeah, do you know what it's like? It's like those things where things have got down. They've made a dam, a natural dam in the river, because everything is all interlinked, and you can't pull anything out because everything is got about 5 or 6 different things supporting it. Do you know those sort
Right.
of structures?
Yes.
On the plus side, if you keep trying to pull things a little bit, every now and then you find one that you can slide out.
Mm-hmm.
And the hope is that you do that a few times and things start to come free.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a sort of a meta strategy, there's no point in banging your head against brick walls.
Mm-hmm.
I really am mixing metaphors horribly. You have to find the points of weakness, the places where there's something, like for us, that's been in court. There have been several useful court cases. But looking forward, if we don't get this Supreme Court win on Wednesday, which I hope we will,
Mm-hmm.
we will. We've got some other court cases going,
Mm-hmm.
and they are. God, sorry, I keep thinking of something I should have said first. So, the Supreme Court case on Wednesday. On Wednesday, our Supreme Court will be ruling what the meaning of sex is in the Equality Act here in the
Right.
UK, which recognises 9 protected characteristics, one of which is sex, and it says male and female, and another of which is gender reassignment, which is their old-fashioned word for identifying as trans.
Right.
And the male and female, it's not clear whether that means post getting a gender recognition certificate or not.
Right.
If it does, they're 2 mixed sex categories,
Right.
because the Equality Act is 2010, the Gender Recognition Act is 2004, but the sex things in the Equality Act are from 1975 from the
Right.
Sex Discrimination Act. So it's genuinely not clear what the thing is here, and the
Right.
Supreme Court will decide. So whatever happens, if we get that fixed, then we're cooking on gas.
Yeah.
We can go back to all sorts of organizations and say, your guidance is wrong, your rules are wrong, the regulators, NHS trusts, all these things. There's this sort of whole thing of work to get everybody to unwind misinterpretations.
Yeah.
But if the Supreme Court goes against us, there's other laws. And the good thing about the Equality Act is that it's quite a big and widely encompassing law. So it covers all sorts of sex discrimination, harassment, whether when it's legal or illegal to have single sex spaces and services and that sort of thing. So it'd be great if we got that. That'd be like if you were an invader and you managed to take the whole of the citadel in the middle and the outer walls.
Yes.
But if we don't do that, then we just have to try and take this, the little bit in the middle. We have to
Yeah.
regain that. And that would be the laws where it's really much more bodies and much more intimate. So that would be about things like intimate searching by police.
Uh-huh.
And the law here is the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. I think it's quite old. It might be 1975. And that says that searches must be done by someone of the same sex unless they're more than the removal of an outer hat, coat, and gloves.
Ah,
But the police have been saying that men with gender recognition certificates are women for the purposes of searching,
mm-hmm.
if they're officers, and that men who say they're women must be searched by women. And
Right.
that's so obviously wrong. The law predates the Gender Recognition Act, but most importantly, there's a ruling, previous ruling in the European Court of Human Rights that says that forcing people to undress in the presence of someone of the opposite sex is cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. And
Right.
that is an absolute human rights violation that states must take positive action to
Right.
prevent. It can't be balanced against anything else like privacy and free speech.
Uh-huh.
So we're doing that anyway. We're taking the police to court on that. We're doing some other things like that.
Good.
Because we've really seen that under the current government, we are engaging with them and we are making headway explaining things to them, but the courts are the institution where
Uh-huh.
we think we're most likely to be able to pull out these bricks or these twigs or whatever metaphor
Right.
you want to
Yes.
use. And then each one that you get becomes something that you can then build on. So if we don't get the Equality Act, I think we'll get the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. And if a
Right.
man isn't a woman for the purposes of forcing a woman to take off her
Right.
underwear and bend over, then why the hell is he a woman for the purposes of medical treatment? Do you see what I
Right.
mean? You
Yes.
work out that way.
Yes.
So that's basically the sorts of things that we do at Sex Matters.
Right.
We find strategic areas to lobby on, to take court
Right.
cases on. We don't take many court cases. We support other people in doing it.
Right.
And we write reports.
Right.
We hold events. We do briefings, that sort of thing. But it's always on this
Okay.
strategic thing of how can you reestablish the fact that when we say sex, we have to mean sex. Otherwise, people's
Yes.
human rights are
Yes.
damaged. And that's also the plus of it all being related. Like it's
Yes.
the same question.
It
If you can
is.
make progress in one place, you leverage that in other places.
Yes. Yes. And it seems in the UK that, there have been some victories, or at least there's a change in.
Oh yeah, there've been
People
victories for
say there's a
sure.
change in the tone, there's a change in environment. You went to a book festival, a literary festival, for the first time since you wrote your book 4 or 5 years ago, and you weren't invited to those previously, I guess, because you were on the bad list of people that shouldn't be invited. And so people are, I feel, I've heard from some people in the UK, there's a different energy, there's a different mood, we're in a different place. But then I see these sort of crackdowns that keep coming up that seem, the backlash is huge, right? It seems to be.
Well, there's just a real problem with free speech in this country.
uh
Huge problem with free speech.
right.
I mean, I think there is everywhere. People don't believe in free speech. They
Right.
really don't.
Right.
They think that we have it
Mm-hmm.
because they don't want to say anything that's
Yes.
unpopular. And then it's only when you want to say something people don't want to let you say that you realize you don't have it. I mean, I'm what people call a free speech absolutist, which does
I see.
not mean that I think you can say anything you like anywhere.
Uh-huh.
Like if people misunderstand that. I wouldn't allow you to shout fire in a crowded room,
Right.
And I
Yeah.
don't believe that you can harass your colleagues at work. And
Right. Got
but
it.
I believe that you can say. I mean, for example, and this will be controversial. I don't believe in exclusion zones outside abortion clinics.
Uh-huh.
I don't think women should be harassed going in.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, we've just seen a woman sentenced here in the UK for standing outside an abortion clinic with a sign that just said, "I'm here to talk if you want."
I see. Right.
That's not okay.
She
It's
wasn't
just not
screaming at
okay.
people. Right.
She wasn't screaming at people and she wasn't showing pictures,
Right.
upsetting pictures of mutilated fetuses or something like
Right.
that. You can't expect your own ideas about the world never to be challenged.
Right.
You just can't. And that includes by people that you fundamentally disagree with. I say to both my sons,
Mm-hmm.
one is gay and one is straight. And I say there are people in the world who think, significant numbers of people in the world who think it's wrong to be gay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your problem what they have
Mm-hmm.
inside their head. It
Mm-hmm.
isn't even your problem if they say it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's your problem if they won't hire you, if they try to beat you up,
Yes.
if they try to bully you. But if
Yes.
somebody says, I don't think that men should be allowed to get married and I think that gay men are going to go to hell, I just say to my son, they can think that.
Yeah.
They've got freedom of conscience and expression too.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to impact on you. You have your own
Yes.
self-image.
Solid sense.
So yeah,
So,
I mean it's not a crackdown as such on TERFs. It's just that we're the
okay.
biggest group of people saying a very ordinary thing
Right.
that is deprecated.
Well, let's open it up for a few questions now from people, and the Q&A. We're using the Q&A for those of you that have a question and want to write it down. Then I won't be able to use all of them likely, but I will pick some from from that section. So go in there now. If you've been writing your own notes on a piece of paper, please ask a question. And while we're waiting for the first one, because I should have asked for people to open that a little while ago, the data collection, the woman who just did the study on
It's
how
Alice
government,
Sullivan.
yes, Alice Sullivan, wonderful work that she was doing. And I thought that would be something that would go over really well here, because I think people don't have a clue that what's going on. Is that moving around and getting incorporated and being
Oh, it's
accepted by?
incredibly important. I mean, the
Okay,
thing is, like I said, everything we're going to do everything the hardest possible way, you know, like literally institution by institution. It should just be that the government agrees, listen, let's stop with all the bollocks, you
right,
know. But they're not. They're doing a big scheme of work across the government that's going to take for absolutely ever to say, you know,
right,
what are the data collection needs to do with sex in the passport office and the driving license agents. You know, it's the same in all of them. There's
yes,
just two sexes. However,
yes,
they're going to do it the slow way. But I mean,
yes,
you know, Peter Kyle, who is the Labour minister, who you know, who heads the relevant department, DSIT, Department of Science, Innovation and Technology, he
right,
sent it out to every other department. And it's very relevant to digital identities, which are going to be the next big fight. I mean, this is what I think we're going to spend this current government working on is digital identities, because there's a big scheme to digitize all government paperwork.
mm-hmm.
But at the moment, a lot of government paperwork falsifies sex. And it
Yes,
doesn't just falsify it, it falsifies it differently. You know, you can apply it separately. You can
yes,
apply separately to change the sex on your passport, your driver's license, your NHS records, your birth cert. So there's
right,
probably about 100,000 people who have different sex on two
yes,
fundamental bits
yes,
of government paper.
yeah,
And this is going to break the system if they don't fix it. But
right,
they didn't notice.
right,
We've brought this to their attention. Alice has brought it
yes,
to their attention,
good.
and they're now trying to pretend that it's not going to break things, but it will.
Well, she was
Yes,
asked to speak
there's
here
a
a
number
while
of
back, and then she was uninvited. So nobody here wants to
Well,
hear
you
her.
guys should have her. She's great.
No, I mean, she was asked by the government
No, I mean,
to
but you
speak
guys
here.
should have
But
her.
yes, I would love to have her here and hear about it. And I think this is an important thing that we could work on.
yeah, a
We've
number
got some
of
questions.